So I want to welcome you folks today. I'm going to be sharing about fake news and real curriculum. We'll have some chances, I hope, for you to kind of do some discussion and might, if you have enough time, to do a little bit of a breakout room and a little bit of exploration. So again, I'm really happy to see you folks today. And my name is Dr. Lesley Farmer, as you can see on the slide. I teach teacher librarians, that's what we call school librarians in California, and educational technology at California State University, Long Beach. I'm also a member of CUE, so Computer Using Educators, which is based in California and is a really good place to talk about technology and how that impacts teaching and learning. And then as far as fake news has been concerned, something that I've been interested in for a while, I've been interested in media literacy for even a longer time. But in terms of fake news, probably the last few years.
Okay.
And again, if you're not talking, probably mute. I hope everybody knows how to do that.
Ahí está perfecto.
So I don't want, folks to, have to share too much.
Señorita
Okay,
guapa.
in that respect.
Okay. A ver, dime qué vas a dibujar.
So with that, let me just.
Un corazón, ok. Vamos a hacer un corazón entonces. Okay. ¿De qué color lo vas a hacer?
All right.
I can tell her if you want.
Pink. Ok, vamos a hacer un corazón pink.
So folks, just check to make sure if you are muted.
¿Tienes pink?
I think I may have to go ahead and mute for others. Just to play it safe. Okay. So a lot of this information you're actually going to find on a website that I founded and maintain, and it's called Fake News. It's I'll give you the URL a little bit later. So again, this is where I have collected a lot of resources, including curriculum. Again, it's just a preview of things to come. What I'd like you to do right now, though, is if you're interested, is to go to the chat and then just tell me what, and in fact, I'm going to switch back one page. And that is, what's your definition of fake news? So if you could just put in the chat. And again, if you like to use the keyboard, it'd be Alt-H. All right, good. So people talk about clickbait. Some of the reasons, trying to sway people's opinions, right? Not the whole story. Good. Made up news. Okay. Good thoughts, good thoughts. So let's kind of explore this some more. So usually what we're talking about when you're talking about fake news, it's news, right? So current event, things that are happening right now. And it's a situation where it's deliberately published information that is supposed to be perceived as being real, right? And precisely what you folks said, it's usually to try and convince other people, right? To persuade them. Sometimes they do it just for fun or to make money. There have been, cases where young people have basically paid for some of their college by creating fake news because they can get followers and ads out of it. Now, there's other items that are like fake news. So again, it's that, the creator knows that it's false, but they want the people to believe that it's true. So, for instance, misinformation is information that, again, it's information, so it's not just news. It doesn't have to be just current. That where the person who's creating it just made a mistake, you know, that they really were ignorant about it. They really were not trying to mislead people. Disinformation usually is deliberate, misleading, lies, not true, but it doesn't necessarily have to be news itself, okay? And then there's things like, you know, propaganda that might just say part of the news because you want people to believe, you know, your side. It's almost like taking one side of the debate. You know, and you know, there's like satire, parody, and usually for those, you know, the audience, the viewer, the reader is supposed to figure out that, you know, they're making fun or it's a one-off on whatever the information is. This particular chart is from is really useful to look at different kinds of misleading information. So that's if you want to get into some of the nuances of it. So what's the big deal? Sorry about that. About fake news. So basically, there's a whole bunch of people that believe it. And, you know, during the 2016 presidential campaign, you know, fake news was actually broadcast or read by more people than real news. And that 75% of adults, you know, will fall for fake news, right? Especially in terms of a headline. And it's really important to realize that oftentimes what's in the headline isn't the same as what the full content of the article or the news piece is about. And that's where it gets to be a real problem because someone will read just the headline and then they'll share that with their friends. So it's because of that, you know, a number of folks will have, you know, passed on, you know, fake news. And then on the other side, whoever is, you know, look at their friends, you know, Facebook or whatever the communication is, you're like, oh, you know, Sharon says this, so it must be right. Yeah. So that makes it even, you know, worse. And some of you have, you know, pointed out that middle school, high school kids oftentimes, and even students in college, have a hard time sometimes in identifying if the sources themselves, you know, are credible. So, okay, so it's out there and people are sharing it. So, you know, what's the big deal about it? Well, here's the big deal, right? That there is a lot of misinformation, right? So not just news, but other kinds of information. And I've seen this particularly with older teens, young adults, and that is they just start to distrust everything. And that's a really sad kind of a situation. So they just kind of like withdraw, you know, from the news. And what happens then is they don't get the information that they need in order to make, you know, informed decisions. The picture that you see is kind of a one-off in terms of, you know, War of the Worlds, which was basically was a book, but then, you know, it was a radio show, a special that Orson Welles did. And at the beginning of the show, they said, this is just fiction. But if you didn't tune in at the very beginning, you might have thought that there was a real invasion. And some people really panicked. So again, you can get people to panic. And we've seen that in the last, you know, few years as well, you know, whether it has to do with, you know, vaccinations, pandemics, you know, political things. And then on top of it, people get polarized, but it all ends up in that people can make some really poor decisions that can have very serious consequences, all the way to, you know, the point of death. So you have to, I mean, I think we all realize that fake news isn't new, right? There was probably some, you know, cave person who drew on the picture that they, you know, killed, you know, 17, you know, elephants when they just, you know, chased away a rabbit. But, you know, the picture on the left has to do in the Middle Ages where the writer was talking about, you know, lands where they saw people with these, you know, this kind of a body, you know, feature. early news in the 1835, these, bat-like creatures that are on the moon. Beginning of the 20th century, there was a big thing about these little fairies that, young people were experiencing, and those little fairies happened to be just like paper, but they were done in a photograph. So, people thought that photographs are always going to be true. So each time that there's a new medium, there is that chance for news to be broadcast. And it really has exploded, because of, social media. More people have access to be able to, share information. And again, there's been more of a social polarization in a lot of different areas. So hopefully you remember this photo became really famous about, fellow standing right by when the plane was supposed to be hit the towers in New York City, and it was fake, right? That's the other thing, is that it's so much easier to edit, to Photoshop images so that they look real, but they aren't. They're just, again, edited. And now the newest thing are deep fakes, which basically takes your moving image instead, and then can mash up, sounds and motion, and basically put words or gestures in other people's mouths. So why do we believe, fake news? Well, number one, the first article that comes out about some news event, that's kind of our standard. And so anything that comes afterwards, kind of is measured against that first story. And what happens increasingly is that people really want the news, immediately. And so what happens is that some of your mainstream news outlets don't always have the time or take the time to verify, the source. And so it gets out there, and they may retract it later, but it's a little bit late. So again, whatever you hear first, and then if more people, share that, and they see that repeated, pretty soon, you come to believe it. News that's compelling, it has those really strong words and it resonates for you. So you feel like, yeah, I hadn't realized that, or yes, that's just what I thought. So it's believable, and it confirms our own, past experiences, our own beliefs. And we find that people, who don't have as much cognitive ability have a harder time than changing, changing their own beliefs as well. We're seeing on the side, these are, two pictures of Julia Roberts, and one of them is definitely, Photoshop. So again, if that's one of the consequences, it looks pretty realistic, and you'll see lots of figures, celebrities, famous people, and they have certain, body images, so they think that's the way they look. And teen girls in especial will have a real, a problem with that. So again, this would be videotaped. So I would encourage you to, see what some of those possibilities are. And in fact, let's see if we can do this.
So everybody, can I just make a quick announcement? This is from the Teach Collaborative. Thank you everybody for coming. We appreciate you being here. Lesley, I just want to remind everybody, if you guys can please mute yourselves so that we can hear Lesley, the presenter. We can hear your background noises. Mercedes, I think you're unmuted, so if you can mute yourself, thank you so much. I appreciate everybody being here. That was it, Lesley. Thank you so much.
Great. So I'm not sure if you'll get the sound or not, but just actually, even just looking at this is quite enough to kind of get the idea. So. I think this is probably, this is more for, high school, but.
We can't see the video.
You can't see the video?
No.
So
I think you're
let me
gonna have
stop
to
it right now.
Yeah.
Just
So you're gonna have to.
I know. Yeah. Let me do that. So just a sec. We'll get to just the video. Thank you. Glad we checked that out. I'm going to stop it a little bit earlier. All right. So basically, this is a Photoshop of a photo session, and it shows how how even, to begin with, how people manipulate images, but even more so afterwards.
Lesley, I'm just gonna say something. I've been reading the chat. You can go ahead and mute Mercedes. She's the one with the background. So if you click on the right, so you can mute her yourself, because I don't think she's looking at the chat. And the students cannot hear the background with the background noise.
All right. So
Thank you so much. Here we go.
Absolutely. So let me just do a quick muting. Most of you. Okay. All right. Moving right along. All right. Thank you. Appreciate that. So again, when you see things that are of interest to you, and it affects you, right? And we do have that confirmation bias. We want to kind of look at, when we have those kinds of immediate responses, then that's when we need to think about why do we have that emotional trigger? And when one of you at least asked, well, how do we help our kids to discern fake news? Well, one of the things is that they really react emotionally quickly on it. That might be a sign right there, because folks who create fake news really do try to use evocative images and evocative, languages and evocative sounds. So let's kind of look at young people in particular. They tend to be getting their news online or social commentary, TV, whether it's John Oliver, et cetera. And they're not that great at search strategies. So like trying to find the right keywords, et cetera. And so the first items that might appear in a search are probably ones that could have ads. And a lot of our young people can't differentiate between an ad sponsored file or show as opposed to ones that aren't paid for. And there are ways for fake news creators to increase popularity. There's a number of different techniques, including the use of bots, so that they'll be on that first page. So it's like, oh, so it's easier to find. And they also, even once they get to the information, is be able to really discern the source and be able to kind of go through the content. It's harder for them, if for no other reason that they just don't have the same kind of background knowledge as someone who's been around longer. Another thing about young people is they're not always persistent and kind of drilling down to find out where the source is, for instance, of an image. And they can be easily confused if there is information that's conflicting from one source to another. They're also likely to just take a look at a news source as a whole, rather than kind of, again, drilling down to, different news stories on different subjects, or, different parts of a newspaper, for example. So they just kind of, blanket either yes or no. And also they'll, tend to kind of form their ideas about something based on opinion more than an evidence. Girls, by the way, tend to be a little more cautious about the source of information. On the other hand, girls will tend to share the information a little bit more. So those are just things to think about. So I talk about fake news and the kind of the literacies in order to discern fake news. The kind of umbrella is information literacy, but fake news is basically a subset of news literacy. And news literacy is kind of a subset of media literacy, that is how different formats, different media then impact, shape the message. So, film as opposed to radio has both motion and vision, for example. Digital literacy is certainly a big component. Numeracy, data, being able to discern data. And the meta literacy, we're really talking about being literate about literate. In other words, being self-reflective about, what do I know and what do I not know, and how then can I learn? So I just want you to kind of like see, how fake news then fits into, education, quite frankly, because that's kind of what our big thing is, isn't it? Being able to, find and evaluate and use and share and generate information. And fake news is, kind of a black hole in the midst of all of that stuff. So you want our students to be both consumers and producers of information. So you have to understand that I'm I really like the show Hamilton. So let's face it, not very many schools. I mean, I'd be really interested in if any of you folks are in school situations where fake news or even news literacy is part of the curriculum. It's tended to be sort of ignored or just like, quote, one shot, what we call a one-shot presentation. So if you're in a situation where you are able to teach others about fake news and news literacy, what are the absolute, like, really need to, to get across? So this is kind of like bare bones. And I've already kind of started, sharing some of that information with you as a part of this presentation. So just start out to define fake news and find out where people are coming from on that. And then why it's important, so the consequences. And from this point on, I'll be able to actually demonstrate and give you some, sources in terms of these other topics of like, what does it look like? Who can you trust? And for all of you, I mean, if nothing else, this last point about being a fact checker. I have to tell you again, I have a librarian background, so we talk a lot about website evaluation. And if you have kind of like collaboration with librarians, teacher librarians, school librarians, public librarians, academic ones, they will oftentimes talk about how do we evaluate information, including websites. But I do think that, focusing on, the validity of the information, being a fact checker sounds a lot more fun than today we are going to evaluate a website. So being a fact checker. And so this is like really simple. And again, get nothing else. This can help you. All right, so this is the deal. So to look through that news article, right, or news story. So not just the headlines, but the whole thing. And also, the links and any attributions, to make sure, and you'll find that sometimes a picture, it doesn't really go along with the story, or the picture comes from a different, source. So there's an incongruity on there. So looking through the whole article, find out, again, what kind of evidence do they bring to the table, et cetera. What arguments do they provide in terms of pushing their point of view? To look up, and again, with your first graders, they can actually do motion. So to look through, to look up, so they can actually motion that themselves. To trace the source, where did it come from? So even yes, so who is the author on it? And if there's not an author, right? What publication did it come from? Was the article, for example, newspapers oftentimes will use other sources and they pull from them and they put them into, into their product. So finding out where that source came from. With pictures, you can sometimes go to paste that picture into a Google image, discover bar, and you can kind of trace back where the source is, if nothing else by date, because usually those images will be date stamped, right? So then, and then looking across, so what do other sources say about that same, news story? And again, how much information do they provide? How much detail? How many citations, are provided on there? Who again is creating this, producing it, etc. And then looking inside, right? So what are my own biases? We all have biases. What's my own perspective, and how is that affecting how I engage with this information? All right. So what is fake news? What does fake news look like? So this is a website that originally came from Scholastic Magazine, and I've given you a source, current source for it. So being able to actually label, different items. So here, for instance, says, little things like, the domain or URL, address. Is it commercial? Is it educational, etc. Is there about us information? And if there isn't, you might be, concerned about that. And sometimes they will tell you, and it's a great ad about, the best cigarettes, and then you find out, it's a tobacco company, right? That are the pictures captioned? Do they say where the photos came from? Again, the headlines. Usually, if they make if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And again, do the headlines match the rest, of the story? Are there pop-up ads? That's how fake news creators oftentimes make money, is basically, folks who have certain agendas that will have an ad that is placed, on there so that they can get more coverage. So those are just a few of the simple things you can really drill down in terms of visuals, things like, 300-pound cats, where are the light sources for it? You can drill down into, the pixels, and if, in other words, the resolution of a picture. In some cases, there'll be like different kinds of resolutions depending on the part of the picture, and that is a real tip-off that there is there's been photoshopping. So just, providing students with examples of fake news is a good way then for them to identify all those different, parts. Again, here's from the International Federation of Library Associations institutions. If nothing, you can just have this as a poster that you could have in your class, to checking the author, the dates, someone trying to make a joke, etc. So that's also a nice, clear, image. Then, who can you trust, right? So this is kind of a nice image. It's not, completely 100% perfect, but I think it's at least it gives you some criteria. And I also have some sources for you about, evaluating media outlets. So again, there can be parts of a specific media outlet that are more or less accurate or have certain kinds of bias. But just in general, things to think about is like, how, where are they coming from? Are they very liberal? Are they very conservative? And again, in general, but also, in specific parts of that outlet. Is their information just basically, just the facts, ma'am? Or are they starting to, analyze that information or providing you with interpretation? Because every time you, step farther away, from the source, and you're adding your own perspectives on that, that's where some, more prejudice can come in. But it's also where you might add more resources in order to verify it. So it can go both ways. So this is a nice kind of graphic to show some of those ideas. And especially the older your students are, the more advanced they are, they can take a look at, sources and look at these criteria and then say, where do those news sources fit? So that can include, blogs. It can include radio shows. It might be, if you're teaching STEM, it might be, specific, science and technology magazines. There's a big spectrum on that. Because this particular image focuses more on kind of like the general news stuff, like Time and USA Today, et cetera, et cetera. So you can, again, the more mature your students are, the more specialized your topic, the more that you can have specialized again chart in terms of where these different news outlets are coming from. And it's a wonderful experience for your students to do that kind of investigation. I already mentioned about the ways to fact check, and I also have some sources on there. All Sides is a really great website because it will provide you with what All Sides, that particular group, says is really more conservative and more liberal, so you can see the same story from different sources and start to make those, look at the wording, look at how long they are, look at who's writing the material, looking at what they're saying and what their claims are, their evidence. Again, good exercises. There's so many stories that are in that. You'd have no problem in finding something that your students would be interested in. There's also some great tools out there, some great programs in terms of identifying fake news. My favorite is Factitious, where you can kind of guess if something's true or false, and then it'll tell you if it's true and false and why. So that's really useful. Scholastic Magazine has materials for both upper elementary as well as high school in terms of what's, if you have two news stories, which one's fake. So if you want kind of instant lesson, that's a possibility. If someone is talking, let me see if I can mute you. Sorry, I don't like doing that.
So for those of you from
Okay, great. So these are just some starting points. So again, provide 2 news items and 1 fake one, and then have the learners guess which one is true or false and why. Right? Something that's really useful is to take again 2 different sources for the same story and strip it out from whatever the context is, whether it's the newspaper, it's a magazine, picking out the format, so that everything is just looks the same and there's no pictures on it, making sure that the format looks the same, typeface, etc. Because that way, all of those visual cues or visual ways that can stimulate or distract one are taken away. Right? So that's another way for students to then really dig down into the words, the language, and see what's credible and what isn't. Having students actually do some fact checking and try to find a fake news item as far as that goes. Again, fake news has been in history for a long time. One of my favorite sources is American Memory. It comes out of the Library of Congress. So if you just search for Library of Congress, American Memory, you'll see that there are a number of little collections that include fake news. So, for instance, again, what we call snake oil ads or selling land, in the West and streets of gold, et cetera. So that students, again, can see the history of it. They can bring, fake news to the class. We mentioned about seeing sources, from different, topics. to have them, trace back, that information. So all of those are different things. Another thing so those are just really good kind of startup items. It's really good if students can understand how news is created, how it's vetted, how it gets disseminated, who's the intended audience. So the broader concept of media literacy and media production is really useful. So, there's videos out there. I would really encourage you to have, a guest speaker, journalist to come in and explain the whole process. Having students, do a field trip to shadow, a news outlet production, all of those things, give them a better understanding of what the different roles of people are within a news production. And so they can see where, things can get edited, where editors can decide how, a news set of news stories, for instance, a news television program, what news is going to be featured, what's going to get the most time, the most airplay, what's going to get kind of hidden later on. So all of that, and how they decide, the camera angles, all of those pieces. The more the students understand the process, then they have a better understanding of, how fake news can happen, and also, how we can, counter fake news. If nothing else, I mean, even things like photographs, and having a photojournalist, come or seeing, videos about photojournalism, and understanding that the photojournalist, him or herself, chooses what pictures to take, right? And chooses what angle and the lighting and so forth. So that in itself can make a difference. And it could be that their editor tells them, I want you to make that politician look great, or I want you to make that celebrity look really awful. But some of the things are beyond it. So you have, whether it's a still or a moving image, an editor can crop those images, or can crop or edit the video. So each person along the line then impacts that final story that is distributed, because they have a certain agenda or certain mission, in their work. So what are some other thoughts that you have that might be some, if you put in the chat, what are some ideas that occur to you? I'm seeing lots of good questions, good comments. Yeah, the more you make it concrete, that's really good. Yeah, like the fact checker being the, detective. In fact, there's a game that's being created right now on that kind of thing. Why would they make their questions earlier about this model? Why they want to make her thigh and her legs longer? Because they think that women with longer legs and thinner legs are more glamorous. Right, absolutely. Researching the sources, yes. Primary and secondary sources. In a way, this does tie to fake news. The David Macaulay book, Motel of the Mysteries, I think is one of the best ways to look at information and how we interpret it. It's a black and white image I've used this extensively with middle schools, but I think you could, I'm not sure if you can pull it with first graders, certainly by third grade. So take a look. But it's basically the story of some archaeologists in the future, and they find this motel called Toot and Come In. So it's a joke on Tutankhamun. And so they go into the room and they are exploring, and they see the TV on in the room central, and they call it an altar. And they see a credit card, and it has expiration date, and they say about how brave these people were because they know when they're going to die. So it shows how you can take every items and have a different spin, a different perspective on it. So I think that'd be fun for the kids. And then what I had the students do afterwards is they had to take some image, some common thing. So here I have this clip, and then they would maybe say that that this is a little table for really tiny pets or something. So it's a different interpretation of an object. And the idea is that when we look at primary documents or artifacts from a different culture, a different time, we come with certain assumptions, and we could be totally off in terms of what that item really is. So I think even little kids could get that. You can do that with really old kitchen gadgets, for instance, and they have to guess what they are. And again, and that kitchen object is definitely a primary source. And to say that what you bring to that, your experience is going to impact how you make meaning of that primary source. So again, how distance and time makes a difference, why we need to know the context of information. I tell my students all information is contextual. Right? If you have a 10 in sports, is that good or bad? If that's in basketball, that's pretty awful. If that was in golf, probably impossible. If that's in ice skating, it'd be perfect, right? So context. Okay, so let me then, so this is the website that I was telling you about. So definitely, feel free. I'm going to just walk you through it very quickly, and I'll give you a few minutes to explore it on by yourself. It's probably targeted to educators, but the curriculum really fits for middle school and high school and community college. So you get sort of a background, on fake news. I tell about how news is processed and why we believe it. Lots of techniques on how to uncover fake news, including fact-checking tools. I talk about the different literacies that are involved. Too many. Okay, different literacies: media literacy, information literacy, visual literacy, news literacy, data literacy, including science. It's not just enough to be good consumers. I believe that fake news is a good call for us to get engaged civically in terms of combating fake news and uncovering the truth and being informed citizens. The next page then has has curriculum. So I list a number of news literacy curricula that are already out there. I have some PowerPoint presentations and some curriculum, again, more than a one-shot deal for both middle school and high school. I also have some videos that can be useful for you. Do look at all of these materials before you share them with your kids to make sure they're developmentally appropriate. And again, because I'm a librarian, I have to look at the role of the librarian, and just full disclosure on this. I have written a book called Fake News in Context, and by Routledge. So if you're interested in that, there's even more detail in terms of curriculum. But we do have enough time, so I'm going to go back a couple of pages. And in fact, what I'm going to do is let me share the page itself, and let me put it in chat. So HTTP, so give yourselves like 5 minutes to go in there. So it's http://tinyurl.com, because it's faster that way. And it's just fake news literature for library guide. And it's just all one word. And I will also share it on my screen. So I'm just going to give you again about 5 minutes to kind of like do a little exploring, and we're going to come back and you can share what you thought. So let me find a good spot for that. Just a second. Not going to share yet. Okay, so that's what it looks like. And you'll see that here's your big chart. And again, discerning. So fact-checking tools, including visual ones. Some are political, others, aren't. Need to be careful with Snopes because sometimes some of their images are a little mature. And different techniques. In terms of the literacy, I just want to point out to you that I'll have resources, articles on it, and I'll also have learning activities that have to do with news literacy from different angles. I mean, fake news. So we've got news literacy, but also like digital literacy and media literacy, advertising, media literacy, learning aspects, and as much as possible that kind of tie into kind of news literacy and fake news. Visual literacy, and here's where you can get fact-checking tools just on that. And information on like Museum of Hoaxes is a great one. I really would recommend that one. It takes, you get historical, information. They have like quizzes. So I think from, adults will find it, fun. College students will find it fun. Down to, I'd say maybe 5th grade. And then the same thing with information literacy and numeracy. So, how do you understand statistics, et cetera? And also there's a lot of good stuff in terms of fake news and science, which unfortunately has been pretty popular lately. So again, I did put the link in there, but I didn't click on it, did I? No. Sorry. So that's someone else's. And I thought I typed mine in, but I will do that. It's because only Bobby got to see it. Sorry about that. It's pretty dumb. So as you're looking at it, anybody see some interesting features? The nice thing about, fake news is that it's a really good way, kind of a gateway or a hook to get students interested in, whether it's learning about mathematics and statistics or about history or science, because there's information that's out there right now that they are encountering. And again, fake news can be kind of like, very novel and attention getting. So you can use that as a way to really talk about, scientific processes and how we develop arguments. You can use it in language arts. How did fake news impact Western expansion? How does fake, why do research? Why is it important to know, who's speaking and ideas of perspective? Another important thing is that oftentimes, we're looking at media in terms of power. So who has control? In the news media. Who has power to own stations? Know what's on there. How diverse is the information? Oftentimes, fake news tends to denigrate, marginalize people. And so even just looking at it from an equity, anti-racist point of view is an important thing. And that these messages can come through in fake news. So other things that you see that might be useful. Take-home message that I want to just share with you is the truth is out there, so spread the good news. In our last couple of minutes, how might you use this information? And if you want to unmute yourself and share your thoughts. Yeah, definitely look beyond the headlines. Another thing, again, if you have students that are in media, is you can have them take the same, like say, CNN or, raw footage or, download a video and have different students edit that same, information, say the president's most recent speech. And you can actually edit it and it will come out in different ways, that he'll sound very left-wing, or he'll sound very smart, or he'll sound very confrontational. So, how you cut that information and how you sequence it can give you a totally different story, even though you started out with the same information. Yeah, students need to be critical thinkers, absolutely. Yeah, gossip. I think that's a good way for younger, folks, is how stories can change. Good analogy. I'll be here for a few more minutes, but it is 3 o'clock, so I want you to be able to go on to your next session if you're so inclined. Thank you very much for being here, and I will stop the, thank you, stop the recording at this point.